Hey everyone, how are you all doing today? Let's talk about Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, the woman who has haunted history for over 2,000 years. People often imagine her as just a beauty draped in silk and gold, reclining in luxury. But the truth is far sharper, far more dangerous. Cleopatra wasn't simply beautiful, she was brilliant, and her power came not from her face, but from her mind. Not in 1,000 years would you hold Cleopatra's power. Why? Because hers was not the kind of power you inherited, was the kind you command. Rome itself bent to her influence. Julius Caesar crossed seas for her. Mark Antony risked empire for her. Even her enemies spoke her name with a mix of fear and fascination. She turned politics into theater, and her presence into a weapon sharper than any blade. She spoke multiple languages, negotiated with rulers, and ruled a kingdom in one of history's most turbulent eras. While others fought with armies, Cleopatra fought with strategy, persuasion, and charisma. She understood that true dominance was not about brute force, it was about making others move to your rhythm, without them realizing it. Her story reminds us that real power is never just about thrones, crowns, or soldiers. It's about vision, intellect, and the ability to bend the will of others without breaking them. Cleopatra proved that a single woman, armed with wit and unshakable resolve, could outmatch kings and generals. So, when we look back and say, not in 1,000 years would you have Cleopatra's power, it isn't an insult, it's a truth. She was one of a kind, and her legacy is proof that intelligence, charm, and ambition can echo louder than any army. If Cleopatra's beauty is the myth that echoed through time, her true weapon was something far more enduring: her mind. She wasn't simply playing the role of a queen seated on a throne. She was moving pieces on a board where the stakes were empires, and every move she made was deliberate, calculated, and often brilliant. Imagine the world she inherited. Egypt was no longer the unstoppable empire of the pharaohs. It was a fading jewel, caught between powerful neighbors, especially the rising giant of Rome. To survive, Cleopatra had to be more than a ruler, she had to be a strategist, diplomat, and performer all at once. Like a chess master, she anticipated her opponent's moves before they made them, turning potential defeat into opportunities for survival. Her alliance with Julius Caesar was not mere romance, as Hollywood likes to paint it, but strategy woven with precision. Caesar needed legitimacy in Egypt, and Cleopatra needed Rome's military might. By presenting herself not just as a queen but as the living embodiment of Isis, the goddess of motherhood and magic, she didn't just win Caesar's favor. She enthralled an entire audience, binding politics with spectacle. Later, with Mark Antony, she played a similar hand. She turned banquets into stages, arrivals into grand performances, and conversations into webs of influence. Every gesture, every symbol, was designed to remind allies and intimidate rivals that she was not a passive monarch but a force to be reckoned with. Cleopatra didn't just sit at the table of power, she set the table, decided the menu, and chose who would eat. Even her enemies admitted her cunning. Roman propaganda tried to paint her as a seductress who bewitched powerful men. But in truth, it was often Cleopatra who held the reins, guiding Rome's leaders into choices that served her vision. She wielded charisma as a blade, diplomacy as a shield, and illusion as armor. She was, in every sense, a master of the game. And unlike many kings and generals who relied solely on brute strength, Cleopatra understood that the greatest victories are won not on the battlefield, but in the minds of those you seek to control. When people today hear the name Cleopatra, the first image that often comes to mind is that of an impossibly beautiful woman, her eyes lined with kohl, her presence irresistible, her beauty so legendary that it could topple empires. But here's the truth: that image wasn't born in Alexandria, but in Rome. The Romans, masters of propaganda, needed to explain why two of their greatest leaders, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, had risked everything for this foreign queen. They couldn't admit that she outsmarted them, that she held her own against the might of Rome with nothing but intellect and strategy. So, they wrote her story as one of seduction. They painted Cleopatra not as a stateswoman, but as a temptress. To them, she wasn't a brilliant ruler, she was a dangerous woman who used her body to enslave powerful men. Yet ancient accounts that escape Roman bias tell a different story. Cleopatra may not have been conventionally beautiful at all. What truly captivated those around her was her presence, her wit, her command of language, her ability to make anyone feel as though the universe revolved around her words. She spoke multiple tongues fluently, navigated cultures with ease, and could disarm or enthrall with conversation alone. That, more than any painted face, was her true allure. In fact, Cleopatra deliberately leaned into this Roman caricature of her beauty, turning it into another tool of power. If they wanted to see her as exotic, mysterious, and irresistible, then she used that myth to keep them off balance. But behind the eyeliner and the silks was a strategist who knew that perception itself is a battlefield. Her story forces us to reconsider what real power looks like. It is easy for history to reduce women to beauty, to dismiss intelligence as secondary. But Cleopatra's reign was proof that charisma, intellect, and cultural sophistication could hold as much weight as armies and legions. Rome feared her not because she was beautiful, but because she was brilliant. So when we repeat the old tale of Cleopatra as merely the world's most famous seductress, we unknowingly echo Rome's propaganda. The reality was far more impressive. She was a queen who understood how to weaponize myths, twist perception, and turn even lies into leverage. Cleopatra's life was a careful game of strategy, but every game eventually reaches its end. For years she had balanced Egypt between rival Roman factions, turning alliances into shields and relationships into weapons. Yet when the tide of history shifted against her, even her brilliance could not stop it. After Julius Caesar's assassination, she aligned herself with Mark Antony, a man of immense ambition but divided loyalties. Together they tried to carve out a world where Egypt could remain strong against Rome's growing dominance. But Octavian, later Augustus, was no ordinary opponent. Unlike Caesar, who had been charmed by Cleopatra, Octavian saw her as a threat to Rome's stability and to his own rising power. Propaganda once again became Rome's weapon. Octavian spread tales of Cleopatra as a foreign sorceress, a woman who had bewitched Antony and stolen his loyalty. To the Roman public, Antony was no longer a general. They painted him as a man enslaved by desire. It was not just a political campaign, it was character assassination on an imperial scale. The clash came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Antony commanded a vast fleet, but Octavian's forces outmaneuvered them. Defeat was swift and devastating. Returning to Alexandria, Cleopatra knew the end was near. Rome would not allow her to remain queen, and worse, she feared being paraded through its streets as a change trophy. Humiliation too great for the last pharaoh of Egypt. In the final act of her life, Cleopatra chose her own ending. The details remain clouded in legend. Some say she used the bite of an asp hidden in a basket of figs. Others claim poison. Whatever the truth, her death was deliberate. It was her final act of defiance. If Rome sought to display her as a conquered queen, she would deny them that satisfaction. She would die as she had lived on her own terms. With her death, Egypt's independence ended. The land of the pharaohs became a Roman province, and the Ptolemaic dynasty vanished into history. But Cleopatra's story did not. Rome tried to reduce her legacy to that of a temptress who brought ruin to great men, yet the very persistence of her legend reveals something deeper. Across centuries, she has endured not as a failure, but as a symbol, a woman who defied empires with intellect, charisma, and unyielding will. Cleopatra's fall was tragic, but her shadow stretched far beyond the walls of Alexandria. She became more than a queen, she became an idea. A reminder that even in a world built for men and ruled by empires, a single woman could stand at the center of history and bend it, even if only for a moment. Cleopatra may have died in her palace at Alexandria, but her story refused to be buried with her. Rome, victorious, tried to fix her image in stone as the embodiment of Cleopatra, queen who seduced great men and dragged them to ruin. Yet this was only the first of many versions of Cleopatra that history would create, each one reshaped to fit the needs of its storytellers. In the centuries that followed, she became a canvas onto which cultures projected their fears, fascinations, and fantasies. Medieval chroniclers wrote of her as a cautionary tale, the dangerous woman who lured heroes to their downfall. Renaissance artists, captivated by the drama of her final moments, painted her as a tragic heroine, draped in silk with the asp at her breast. Playwrights like Shakespeare turned her into poetry, a figure larger than life, at once irresistible and doomed. By the time she reached the modern world, Cleopatra had become more than a historical figure. She was a mythic archetype. Films cast her as a queen of impossible beauty, novels reinvented her as a romantic heroine, and scholars debated whether she was a ruler undone by passion or a genius crushed by circumstance. Each age, in its own way, remade Cleopatra to reflect itself. Yet beneath all these layers of legend lies a consistent truth. Cleopatra was never ordinary. Her name endures not because she was merely beautiful, but because she embodied the kind of power that transcends her era. She was political theater at its finest, a ruler who wielded charisma like a weapon, and a queen who dared to challenge the greatest empire of her time. More than 2,000 years later, her story still grips us not because she lost, but because she dared to play the game on her own terms. And though Rome wrote the first draft of her legacy, the world has never stopped rewriting it. Cleopatra's story didn't end with her death, nor even with the legends Rome wove around her. In many ways, her greatest influence comes from what she has continued to represent long after her throne crumbled into dust. She has become a mirror, reflecting the questions every society asks about women, power, and the ways history chooses to remember them. For centuries, her image was twisted into extremes, either the enchantress who destroyed men, or the tragic lover who died for passion. Rarely was she allowed to be seen for what she truly was, a skilled ruler navigating impossible circumstances with wit and calculation. This selective memory is telling. Men who manipulated politics through charm or cunning were remembered as clever strategists. Cleopatra, using the same tools, was branded dangerous, deceitful, or simply too seductive. Today, scholars and storytellers are re-examining her life through fresh eyes, peeling away the propaganda of Rome and the romantic embellishments of later centuries. What emerges is a figure far more human, but no less extraordinary. A ruler who spoke to her people in their own language, who positioned herself as both pharaoh and living goddess, and who understood that perception was as powerful as armies. In modern culture, Cleopatra has become a symbol that transcends history. She represents the complexity of female leadership, the double standards women face when they wield influence, and the enduring fascination with figures who blur the line between legend and reality. Every time her image is reimagined and staged, on screen, in scholarship, it reignites debates about how much of her story belongs to fact, and how much to myth. And perhaps that is her greatest legacy. She forces us to question how history itself is written. Was Cleopatra truly the seductress Rome claimed, or the strategist Rome feared? Was she undone by passion, or by the relentless machinery of empire? The very act of asking these questions shows that she still has power, the power to unsettle, to provoke, to remind us that history is never as simple as it seems. As the centuries unfold, Cleopatra's presence lingers like a shadow carved into history's stone. She is not simply remembered. She is reinterpreted, reborn, reframed by every generation that looks back at her. To the Romans, she was a dangerous foreign queen who threatened their order. To Renaissance artists, she was a tragic heroine. To modern audiences, she is a symbol of charisma, intelligence, and the double-edged nature of power. But what makes her so enduring is not just the drama of her life or the tragedy of her death. It is the questions she forces us to ask. How do we measure true power? Is it in the armies commanded, the wealth amassed, or the empires preserved? Or is it in the ability to bend perception, to craft identity, to move others not by force, but by presence? Cleopatra lived in a world that sought to define her, diminish her, even erase her, and yet, two millennia later, she stands taller than most of her conquerors. The very empire that tried to reduce her to a cautionary tale has long since crumbled into dust, while her story continues to fascinate and provoke. Standing at the edge of her legacy, we are left with the sense that Cleopatra was more than a queen of Egypt. She was a master of narrative, a ruler who understood that power is not only what you hold in your hands, but what you leave behind in the minds of others. Cleopatra's throne has long since vanished, her palaces swallowed by the sands, her empire reduced to ruins beneath modern cities. And yet, her voice still echoes through history, not in speeches recorded on scrolls, but in the myths, the fears, and the fascination she continues to inspire. She was a queen who fought empires not with legions, but with wit, charisma, and vision. She was a woman who bent history, if only for a moment, to her will. Rome tried to erase her by turning her into a caricature, but in doing so, they ensured her immortality. For every attempt to diminish her, the legend only grew. She became a symbol of resilience, of the power of narrative, and of the fact that true influence cannot be chained to a single lifetime. Her story still compels us because it asks questions that remain as urgent now as they were 2,000 years ago. What is power, truly? Is it the ability to conquer lands and command armies, or is it the ability to endure in memory, to shape how the future sees you, long after your enemies are gone? Cleopatra may have lost her kingdom, but she won something far greater. A legacy that outlived Rome itself. And so we are left with a final, unsettling question. In the end, is power measured by what you hold in your hands, or by what remains of you in the imagination of the world?